Welcome to your online lecture for Chapter 8, The Way of Wisdom, in which we'll cover the book of Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. Just a reminder again that what's covered here in the online lecture is just a sampling of what you find in the textbook, which I encourage you to read entirely. As well, there will be an extra slideshow for the book of Job that you'll be able to access online. Just a few points in general. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Book of Job are wisdom literature in the Tanakh. Their style and view of the world are distinct. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are dominated by short observations and instructions about life and how to live, as well as poetry focusing on the nature and meaning of life, and Job is characterized by poetic dialogue. It's also a narrative. In the wisdom literature, we find that the law and the covenant are not dominant themes. Rather, the themes have to do with the human search for and maintenance of order, as well as some of the most basic questions in life, such as, why do the innocent suffer, and is there justice in the world? If we all die, what is the meaning of life? As such, the wisdom literature stands on its own, and they must be bracketed off. Please note that this slide is an addendum to your slides. When we look at the literary world of Proverbs, what we see is exactly what its title indicates, a collection of short sayings that offer advice or express accepted wisdom as truth. The sayings are organized only very loosely in distinct collections that only rarely exhibit any theme or structural coherence. Even the chief exception to this judgment, Proverbs chapters 1 to 9, displays only modest structural organization. And so, with our literary lens, what do we see in the book of Proverbs? In chapter 1, we have a short introduction. In chapters 1 to 9, we have a father's wisdom for his son. In chapters 10 to 22, we have a collection of Proverbs of Solomon. In chapters 22 to 24, we find a parallel with the wisdom of Amenemop, and that is wisdom literature from Egypt. Other Proverbs of Solomon continue between chapters 25 and 29, the words of Agur in chapter 30, and it concludes with the words of King Lemuel in chapter 31. I encourage you to read through Proverbs and look at some of these collections and compare them. I suggest you focus specifically on Proverbs chapter 8. Consider who speaks out here and what is this character's gender and relationship to God. This slide is an addendum to your slides. When we look at the literary world of Ecclesiastes, we see that it is truly an enigma in biblical literature. Its rhetoric is some of the best known of the Bible to generations of readers. The refrain, quote, vanity of vanities, which you find in 1 verse 2 and chapter 12 verse 8, as well the dictum, quote, for everything there is a season, which you find in chapter 3 verse 1, and the advice, quote, to eat, drink, and be merry, which you find in chapter 2, verse 24, all owe their place in common parlance to the book of Ecclesiastes. Yet the book's contents otherwise are little known, let alone understood by people inside or outside of Jewish and Christian communities of faith. And as we shall see, when its rather disconsoling message is heard, one wonders how it could be authored so much of our ordinary speech, let alone found its way into the canon of the Hebrew Bible. The title Ecclesiastes is the Greek translation of a word in the first line of the original Hebrew text, quote, the words of the teacher Koheleth, close quote. Thus, another name for the book is the Hebrew word Koheleth. The meaning of this word is much discussed, and little consensus has emerged on what the title means. Equally confusing for readers has been the question of the book's structure. At times appearing to be little more than a random collection of only vaguely related thought units, Ecclesiastes has defied virtually all attempts to make a sensible outline of its contents. Some suggest the repeated refrain, eat, drink, and be merry, and its rough parallels throughout the book, provide clues to the proper division of the book's parts, but soon this breaks down upon close examination. Others have suggested that the book is most easily understood as a palindrome, having a B, C, B, A structure, and that this signals the influence of Greek philosophy on the author. but this too hardly holds together on close inspection. Indeed, the only clear structural elements appear at the beginning and end of the book. Corresponding to the title in chapter 1 verse 1 is a double epilogue in chapter 12 verses 9 to 11. Matching the thematic refrain in chapter 1 verse 2, Vanity of Vanities, is its double in chapter 12 verse 8. And corresponding to the poem that completes the book, the beginning of the book, in chapter 1 verses 3 to 11, is a concluding piece in chapter 11 verse 7 to chapter 12 verse 7. Between these corresponding structures at the beginning and ending of the book, there are few coherent units. What does seem apparent, though, is a gradual, though not entirely consistent, lengthening of units of closely affiliated material. This outline shows the content of the book of Ecclesiastes. And now we turn to the historical world of the wisdom literature in general. When we look at Jeremiah chapter 18 verse 18, we have a glimpse of the three learned professions in ancient Israel. We find priests who had charge of the Torah, prophets who spontaneously spoke messages from the Lord, and sages who gave advice based on their observation of the way things were. The wisdom literature flows from the sages, who give wise advice to some basic questions in life. In ancient Israel, there were probably three separate settings for wisdom teaching. The first, the clan, and this included parents teaching their children how to behave. Examples you can find in Proverbs chapter 7 and chapter 5. The second setting is the court of the king. For example, Solomon took note of the importance of wise counsel and searched for wisdom, as well as other kings, and we read that in 2 Samuel chapter 16 to 17. Women were also consulted by monarchs in 2 Samuel chapter 14. The third setting for wisdom literature is the school, the setting where sages instructed the young. It is likely that Ecclesiastes emerged from this house of learning. The sages of the ancient Near East constituted the bureaucracies of their societies. They shared a common outlook that was pragmatic and secular. This was in contrast to the sages of Israel, who linked wisdom with piety. In other words, one had to be pious in order to be genuinely wise. Israelite wisdom was part of a much wider movement that had influenced the wisdom of the Bible. In Egypt, there are a number of examples of instructional literature in which a father addresses a son or teacher addresses a pupil. An example comes from an official in the 13th and 12th century BC called a menemopet, which scholars say influenced Proverbs chapter 22 to 23. In Mesopotamia, we also encounter instructional literature. Sages also collected proverbs. One example is the book of Ahikar, which may have inspired Proverbs chapter 23 and chapter 27. Like the book of Job, several other Mesopotamian compositions wrestle with the problem of suffering of the righteous. Another example of influence were onomastica, lists of natural phenomena like flora and fauna. This example of early science is similar to the divine naming of phenomena in Job chapter 38 to 39. Attempts to determine authorship and times of origin for wisdom writings have yielded only limited results. Although there is no reason to doubt that some of the sayings collected in Proverbs stem from the time of Solomon, the book probably developed well into the exilic period. The book of Job probably traces its roots to a righteous ancestral figure, but we have no reliable evidence to determine who that person was. The language of Ecclesiastes dates much later to the 4th and 3rd century BCE. Some of the teachings might mirror Greek Stoicism from the beginning of the Hellenistic period. This slide is an addendum to your slides. Looking at the theological world of Proverbs, we find that the understanding of God is quite straightforward. God, or fear of God, is depicted as the font of wisdom, and God in turn favors those who exercise wisdom in their daily dealings. The way this basic theme is articulated varies from section to section in the book, and it is even absent from a few parts, and may even be put into question by chapter 30, verses 1 to 14. But it is nonetheless the dominant message of Proverbs regarding the nature of God. There is more, though. Read in its canonical context, the book of Proverbs also raises the question of the relationship between Torah and wisdom, and it provides a counterbalance to the very different claims made in Job and Ecclesiastes about the value of human wisdom in God's eyes. One might think that Proverbs' very idea that practicing common sense in one's daily life amounts to fear of the Lord and brings God's blessing would be a serious challenge to the Torah. After all, keeping God's law as a means of meriting God's blessing is at the heart of the Torah, broadly understood. So, does Proverbs cast aside God's law? One might argue from the contents of Proverbs for an affirmative answer, but it would perhaps be a mistake to do so. First, the word Torah, though sparse in the book, appears like bookends in significant places at the beginning of the book and near its end, specifically chapter 6, verse 23, chapter 28, verse 4, verse 7, and verse 9, as a standard for all other ways of acting and believing. It is as though in its final form the book of Proverbs is made to subject common sense to God's Torah. It's also perhaps worth noting that near the center of the book we also encounter two of the three occurrences of the word commandment. In chapter 13, verse 13, and chapter 19, verse 16, we hear that those who keep the commandment are blessed. With these things in mind, it seems more likely that one should read Proverbs as wisdom that seeks to supplement and reinforce Torah rather than replace it. The writers or compilers or redactors of this wisdom were not enemies of the law, but rather its friends. This slide is an addendum to your notes. Some might wonder if there could be theological themes in a book like Ecclesiastes, considering its cynical intentions. However, using narrative criticism, we can see an audience encountering a text with theological significance. A clearly recurring theme in Ecclesiastes is God's control over all reality. There can be no claiming that the human can know what God intends, with his control over creation. But there can also be no denying that God, all the same, orders all things. The passage that most epitomizes this, of course, is Ecclesiastes chapter 3. But other passages make the same point, perhaps none more pithily than chapter 11, verse 5. God is the maker and controller of all things in creation. The contrasting theme to God's control over all things is that of humanity's helplessness before the God of creation. The author seems never to tire of reminding his audience that, while one may ascertain something of God's way with the world, one can never know enough to make any difference from the knowledge. Instead, humanity is fated to live with whatever comes from the hand of God, and from the circumstances that befall us day by day. The corollary of this, of course, is that God's reputation for acting with justice towards the righteous and the wicked is in no way to be trusted. The most powerful articulation of this perspective comes in chapter 8, verses 10 to 14. Quote, "There is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people who are treated according to the conduct of the wicked, and there are wicked people who are treated according to the conduct of the righteous. This also is vanity." Close quote. We have in this text a profound rejection of the notion of retributive justice, and with it an affirmation of the complete and ultimate helplessness of the human being to shape definitively his or her fate. All rests in the hands of a God whose ways are, in the last analysis, inscrutable. The corollary of this double-edged sword of God's mysteriousness and human helplessness is one simple dictum: all that is left in life is to enjoy the good that comes to one. Just as in chapter 8, verses 10 to 14 provides a powerful rejection of retributive justice, 8:15 follows it with a simple advice offered time and again in the book. Quote, "So I commend enjoyment, for there is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and enjoy themselves, for this will go with them in their toil through the days of their life that God gives them under the sun." The book's claim is unmistakable. There are good things in creation, and they are there for human enjoyment. So humans should not miss the opportunity to take pleasure in those things. In this sense, Ecclesiastes sponsors, perhaps somewhat ironically, given the most cynical reading of the original author's intention, a sort of theology of leisure. I invite you now to refer to the online lecture to the Book of Job.